So the next day, my father went to see him, only this time with Luca Brasi. And within an hour, he signed a release for a certified check of $1,000.
How'd he do that?
My father made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
What was that?
Luca Brasi held a gun to his head, and my father assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on the contract. That's a true story. That's my family, kid. It's not me.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where we are continuing our epic exploration of the films and life of Francis Ford Coppola. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Roca. I'm a writer, producer, and host over on the Outlaw Nation, VO guy, and incredibly excited to be finally, after years of doing this show, diving into a series that is arguably my favorite series. A director is one of my favorite directors, and an experience like no other, and giving it the Cine-Files treatment here on the show. I'm excited.
I mean, this has been one of our most requested films of all time, yes. Both Godfather 1 and 2. And I had to say, you know, we talked about this before. There's some movies where I always do my prep.
Yeah.
But there's some movies like... You know, we did Brian's Song. Mm-hmm. We did, there are a lot of movies where it's like, yeah, I did some prep, but I didn't really care. This movie, yeah. I didn't mess around. I mean, this is, we want to do this thing right. It's been requested over and over again, including by Matt Correa, who it's been his request on Patreon forever. And so, of course, you and I are going to talk about it, but I'd like to hear why Matt wanted the Cine-Files to discuss The Godfather.
What's up, guys? This is Matt from Miami, Florida, and thank you guys so much for doing these movies. The reason that I chose these movies, Godfather 1 and 2, is that they're the reasons that I became a cinephile. The cast, the direction, this is honestly the magnum opus of the modern era. Thank you guys so much for doing this month. It's about time.
Okay.
Powerful words from Matt Correa, for sure. Clearly a film that affected him a lot.
John, do you remember how you first came to this film?
Oh, yeah, man. This was one of my father's favorite films. And I think when he started to understand that I was a movie guy, this became scheduled viewing. And I remember that we rented it from the local video store. It could have been Video World or one of those places around us, and brought it home, and we sat down and we watched it together. And I just remember being completely blown away by this movie. I think it was 15 when I saw it for the first time, and just flabbergasted at what this film was. This was around that time, and I'm starting to understand what film is, and I would return to it over and over and over again for so many reasons: for the quotability of it all, for the performances, for my love of Brando, and also doing deep dives on the research behind the movie, like what was involved, some of the analysis, the idea of the orange indicating death, all the numbers around it, the X's, things. Oh, there was so much around this movie that grew in legend and lore every single time. But that first time I saw it, it's one of those moments where you just kind of, after it's done, you just kind of sit through the credits in awe of what you've just witnessed. And if you're any kind of cinephile, it immediately affects you, I think.
I'll tell you what's weird. I don't have a clear memory of when I first saw it because I think I first saw it in pieces.
Oh, okay.
You know, I think I know it was on TV. I know it was at, my house. I remember sitting on the couch, but I don't remember, I remember at a certain point seeing the opening scene and having not seen it before. So I think I saw, the middle to the end, and then I saw different parts of it. And so it was sometime later in high school where I really sat down and watched the whole thing beginning to end. And it's so funny. I've always loved this film. I've always thought it was a great film. And it is one that has just gotten better and better and better every time I watch it. It's so damn good.
And Steve, it's one of those films that when you take enough far enough away from it, you go, could it still be as good as and then you watch it, you're like, yeah, it damn well is. It damn well, watching it for this show for this episode, I was just transfixed again about the quality of this movie. And there have been multiple iterations of it, extended editions, the coda, all of these things that have happened around Godfather 1 and 2, and then 3, of course, eventually. But like they've connected this thing. You know, even TV had when they first debuted on TV 1 and 2, they connected them and put them in chronological order. Right. So you're starting in 2 and ending at the end of 1, and then back to 2, of course. Yeah.
Well, and that, by the way, this is a spoiler alert for a few weeks from now when we do Godfather 2. That's how I first saw Godfather 2.
Oh, wow.
I saw the chronological version before I saw the real movie.
Oh, damn, really? Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, this was the the mid 80s, early 80s. You didn't have control over what you saw. Very true. Was just this was on.
Yeah.
And maybe that also is part of why the very first viewing is a little jumbled in my mind, because I think I saw that fairly early, maybe even before I sat down and watched, in later high school or early college, where I really, really focused on watching The Godfather. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, John, before we get going on this, I have a question for you.
Sure.
This is a question I would like to ask you now, and then I would like to revisit this question at the conclusion of our Godfather exploration. And this question is...
So 6 weeks from now. Okay.
Yes. Which movie do you like better?
When I first became a cinephile, it was definitely Godfather, right? I felt Godfather 2 was at times a bit too expansive. I wasn't always the biggest fan of the Johnny Ola and the stuff in Miami. But as I got older and I understood really what was so important about Godfather Part 2 and how it connected up into our country's history and actually the real history of Murder, Inc. and Meyer Lansky and all of that, then it took on a whole nother level for me. And so I'm very solid in the camp that Godfather 2 is better than Godfather 1 for me because the task is harder. Bringing in Robert De Niro to play a young Vito Corleone at the same time as you're having Michael continue his story and get older, and you're fleshing out both these stories at the same time. Oh, and throwing in this idea of Michael expanding out into Cuba, this idea of wanting to go legitimate, all of that just carries more weight for me now. But it's not by much, but it certainly is the film I prefer to watch if I'm going to choose between the two.
See, I'm really curious about this for me. I've always liked Godfather more than Godfather 2, but partially is because I find it easier, Like I love the Vito stuff. I love the De Niro stuff. That's really enjoyable as much as there's some dark stuff in it. But the Michael stuff is so hard. And I think I've probably watched Godfather twice as many times as Godfather 2. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I'm really curious after doing this serious weeks and weeks of, delving into these things, how I'm going to feel when we come out the other side. Because I know so many people who, like you, say, look, the real impressive movie is 2, not 1. And I understand it, but I've never been drawn to 2 in the same way. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm kind of going how is my opinions and feelings about these things going to change?
Right. It may also be too, Steve, because that Francis Ford Coppola's approach to 2 was he was upset that people liked Michael Corleone, revered Michael Corleone, kind of like Gordon Gekko was revered out of Wall Street when he was supposed to be the villain in that movie. And so he doubled down on the evilness of Michael, on the coldness of Michael, and on, the fact that he kills his own brother. He slaps his wife after an abortion. It's the men he kills, the way he treats her, the way he sets up that senator by sacrificing this poor young prostitute. He is brutal in his desire to achieve success and overall power under the guise of trying to go legitimate, right? He even almost alienates Tom Hagen. So it's throughout the whole movie, he is even more brutal. When in the first one, there are redeeming qualities to Michael in the first one. I have to reassess what you asked me in the first part, the idea of does Michael really care about somebody? Rewatching Godfather 1, I was wrong. He has genuine affection for Kay. He has genuine affection for his brother. He's really hurt by what's happened to his dad. So all of it is there. It just slowly dies as he becomes more and more powerful because he sees that emotion as weakness. And he can't have it in his position, and so I think he doubles down on it in the second film, and Coppola certainly steers it that way.
I totally agree. But that's what's going to be so interesting is we got a long journey to go on. We got a long way to go. But I'll tell you this: the last time of watching Godfather, I saw more of that evil side.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that makes these such great films is that you watch them again and you see new things. And you never stop seeing new things.
Yep. Agreed.
Sometimes I say words like little bit of pre-production. That is not what I'm going to say this time. There's a lot of stories. It's very interesting. But of course, we got to start with Mario Puzo. He had written 2 books. Mm-hmm. They were very well reviewed, and they didn't make him any money.
Yeah.
He was doing magazine work. He wasn't very happy with it. And he basically told his agent, his wife, his family, his mom, he said, you know what? I'm going to write a bestseller. He just decided to write a bestseller, and he decided to do it over the most sensational material he could think of, which was the mafia. He had no experience with the mob. He didn't met any of these people, and he chose not to meet any of these people. This was all done through research, not personal experience. And this is what happened. He writes his first draft. He sends his first draft off to his agent and says, show this to nobody. And he goes to Europe totally on gets a whole bunch of traveler's checks on credit, takes his family, sounds like he had a great time, blew all his money. He's a big gambler, by the way. Yeah. He lost every time. So now not only is he broke, but he's deep in debt. Comes back home, calls his agent, and first thing he hears is not only did his agent disobey him and send the book out, but he had already turned down an offer of $350,000 for the book.
Wow.
Yeah. They finally sold it for $410,000. And then Paramount, who was really in deep trouble at the time, this is right when it had been bought by Gulf and Western. We talked about this when we talked about Chinatown.
Yeah.
Bob Evans is put in charge, and they buy the book, I think for $80,000. They bought the rights. So, and this is before the book came out. So he has gone from broke and actually deeply in debt to suddenly selling the book for $410,000 and $80,000 on top of that for the movie rights. Wow. I mean, that's just crazy. Have you read the book?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, as soon as I watched the movie, I went and rented it from the library and watched and read it. I really enjoyed it too. And I got into the other Mario Puzo stuff, The Last Dawn, which was kind of and then The Sicilian, which was a terrible Christopher Lambert movie. But this was such a great book. This is one of those books that matches the movie. You can go either way and enjoy the experience in both mediums.
It's funny. I read it years ago, and then I read it again just in the last few weeks in preparation for this. And I had very much the same experience that Coppola had, which is that Coppola, the first time he read it, he hated it. Not hated it, but he's like, this is a lot of sensationalist stuff. And there's all sorts of stories, which we'll talk about, that are not in the movie, which are really good that they're not in the movie. Yeah. But that's kind of how I felt. I was like, oh, it's good, but there's all this stuff that I didn't like. Mm-hmm. And then Coppola read it the second time and went, oh, there's a great, great story in here and great, great characters. And if you just trim away some of the other stuff, it emerges. And this second time reading it, I totally saw that. Mm-hmm. All the bones of the movie are really in the book.
Yeah.
They're really there. Yeah. And Bob Evans assigns the producer who we just talked about, Al Ruddy, the producer of $1 Million Baby, is the guy who shepherded The Godfather. Mm-hmm. And now 2 things happen. One is that Paramount is suddenly doing better because they put Love Story out, which is a huge, huge picture. Right. And now they're finally in the black after a lot of problems. And the book comes out, and it is a massive, massive bestseller beyond what anyone could have imagined. 67 weeks on the bestseller list. Wow. 9 million copies in 2 years. That is just crazy. Yeah. And so they hire Puzo to write a script for $100,000. So now he got his $410,000, then his $80,000 to sell the rights, and now he's getting $100,000 to write the script. Puzo's doing great.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he likes to write in Vegas at the casino, and when he gets stuck, he goes down and plays roulette. So I don't know how far ahead he ended up. And he writes a script, 150 pages. It stays very, very close to the book. It sounds like it wasn't a terribly good script because he's not a screenwriter. And now it's time to go find that director. And so who do they go to? Sergio Leone.
Yeah, makes sense. Why not?
Yeah, perfect sense.
Epic
but he
director.
turns it down because he's about to do Once Upon a Time in America. So he doesn't want to do it. So then they go to Peter Bogdanovich. He's a big director at the time. He wanted to make What's Up, Doc? So he turns it down. By the way, had he done it, he said, I would only do it if we get Edward G. Robinson to play Vito Corleone.
Ooh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be really interesting because people forget how good of an actor Edward G. Robinson is. See his stuff outside of like the Little Caesar or whatever. If you watch him in Key Largo or you watch him in a couple other films or what's the Double Indemnity, he's really, really good. So, I mean, this idea that he's just one thing, don't.
But he's also exactly what Hollywood has put forward as a gangster.
Right. Right.
You know, he's the classic Hollywood gangster.
But it could have worked as kind of a Clint Eastwood thing, turning the trope, using the classic Western actor to turn the tropes and the cliches on its head in a film that exposes those cliches for what they were. Yeah.
And then they go to basically all the big directors of the time. They go to Arthur Penn, they go to Otto Preminger, they go to Elia Kazan. All of them turn it down. And finally, Evans decides, you know what, we need to get an Italian-American director. Because basically all those mob movies, and most of Hollywood, let's face it, were mostly directed by, made by, and even starring Jews, not Italians.
Oh, yeah.
You know, including Edward G. Robinson, by the way. He's Jewish.
There you go.
And Paramount itself had just had a huge bomb, which is a movie called The Brotherhood, directed by Martin Ritt, Jewish, and starring Kirk Douglas, also Jewish.
Yeah. Yeah, no mob movies had really made or been these big hits, right? You had in the past, you had like Scarface and Public Enemies and Little Caesar and all those, but those were anomalies. They didn't really rely on the gangster film as a genre at this point to be something that would accrue Best Picture Oscars, you know? The approach to this genre, people forget the approach to this genre was completely different in like the early 70s before this film was made than it is now with something like The Sopranos and Goodfellas and Scorsese's whole resume for the most part. You know, there's a lot more reverence, there's a lot more expectations for a mafia film or a mafia TV show now.
Well, and I think, I mean, it was a genre. Warner Brothers made lots of gangster movies, but it's a B genre. It's a B genre. Yeah, like and all those movies you just named and The Sopranos and all that stuff, I don't think any of that happens without The Godfather.
Absolutely. 1,000%. Yeah.
So now they go, we want an Italian-American director. Let's get someone that works cheap. We've already spent enough money. And so they go go after Coppola, who just directed The Rain People. As I said, didn't like the book, found it sensationalist and sleazy. By the way, the day that Al Ruddy called him up and said we offered him the job of The Godfather, he got his very first interaction with Marlon Brando.
Oh, wow.
I never knew this. Brando called him that day, he'd never met him, to turn down the lead in The Conversation, which is the movie that Coppola wanted to make next.
Wow. Was he going to play the Gene Hackman part?
Gene Hackman.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn.
That was Coppola's first choice for The Conversation. By the way, Brando was also Mario Puzo's first choice. Long before Coppola was involved, as soon as he sold the rights to Paramount, he said Marlon Brando should play Vito Corleone. And Paramount said, no way, never going to happen. Brando is not going to be in this movie.
Yeah. For those of you who are not historians of film or historian, like Brando at this point in his career is toxic. Brando at this point, there's issues all through the 60s, The Last Tango in Paris, all of these issues that are rolling through with him. And so he's box office poison, according to a lot of people at this time. Even though it was the time of the auteur in the 70s, Brando was considered, who a lot of people idolized growing up and getting into movies, he was considered box office poison. So, he was not their first choice. And Coppola, when it was his choice, had to fight tooth and nail to get Brando to be in the film.
Well, that's what we're going to hear over and over again. Coppola had to fight tooth and nail.
Yeah.
The whole movie is him fighting. So he says, no, I don't want to do this Godfather movie. And he's up, of course, in the Bay Area, is working on American Zoetrope, and they are in deep, deep trouble, as they are pretty much forever. They had just made THX 1138, which is George Lucas's first film, which is weird.
It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to be on the Cine-Files anytime soon.
No.
And they are $400,000 in debt. And George Lucas goes up to Francis and says, Francis, take the gig.
We need money.
We kind of need the money. And of course, at first, Francis, who wants to make personal films and artistic films, he looks at this on his first read of The Godfather and says, this is exactly what I don't want to do. But then on his second read, just like I did, he went, oh, wait, no, there's something here. He takes the deal. He gets paid $125,000 plus 6% of the gross.
Little did he know.
Paramount didn't think this was going to be, nobody thought this is going to be a hit. Initial budget is $2.5 million, and the studio wants it shot naturally on location in Kansas City. And contemporary. They want to move it from a 40s movie to a 70s movie, 40s movie in New York to a 70s movie in Kansas City. And this is the first fight. This is one of the first fight. Coppola's like, no, it has to be a period piece, and we have to shoot it in New York. Yeah. And he's like, this relates to the emergence of the new America, of capitalism, of America on the new stage after World War II. There's a huge difference in Michael Corleone coming home as a veteran of World War II than if it was contemporary, because then he's coming home from Vietnam.
Yeah.
And that's just different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, at this moment, Patton hasn't come out yet.
Yeah.
He's writing the script. And now the book starts to become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now they're going, maybe we could spend a little more than $2.5 million. And the budget starts going up. And so Coppola starts to get his way. And now there's the Puzo script. And now Coppola starts working on a script. And it sounds like there are a lot of stories in Hollywood where, there's a lot of different people writing scripts and there's a lot of bad blood. That doesn't sound like it was the case. It sounds like they were each writing, they'd send each other drafts, they'd send each other notes on drafts. And it was, they say it was relatively simpatico. Yeah. That might also be, what they say. And Coppola, this is what he did, which is so interesting. And you could see pictures of this, and you can even read, he's put out the Godfather notebook. Mm-hmm. What he did is he made a book that's like a stage manager's book. It's called a prompt book. And I was a professional stage manager. That was my first pro theater gigs, when I was in college. And what you do is you take the script and you take basically 2 copies of the page and you tape it to an 8.5 by 11 page. So you have a big white paper around it and the little script in the middle, and then you flip it over and you have the other side of the page. And Coppola talked a lot about, how carefully he did this, and he double reinforced all the holes in the 3-ring binder, and he lovingly built this. It takes a while over time. And he took every single page of the book and made this prompt book out of it. And then he sat in Cafe Trieste in North Beach in San Francisco, which is home of the beat poets. I mean, it's this is where Ginsberg and all those guys hung out, and started working on not the script but the book. And he took notes and he underlined things and put things in the margins, and it's pages and pages of the notes. And what he did was he wrote a synopsis of each scene, and also was figuring out this scene is not going to be in the movie. Mm-hmm. And asked the question of, why is this scene important? And this is the thing he got from Elia Kazan, who believed that every scene had a core idea in the middle of it, and that's why the scene is in the movie. What's so crazy, is I never heard this before, and yet this is what, in particular in the last 2 years of teaching directing, this is basically what I discovered, because I would continually ask my students, what is this scene about? What is it about? And I can't tell you how often I would just get total blank faces.
Which is mind-blowing, because that's the first thing you learn in acting is, what is the scene about? What are the objectives of the scene?
Yep.
And I even had a teacher in Florida State who's a very good drama teacher who said every scene is about some form of sex. which means you're trying to get something here, something from the scene, and it could be mental sex, physical sex, it could be relationship sex. It is some form of a desire that you have, and that's what it is. Every person in the scene has to have a desire for something, and the overall desire is the point of the scene. And so it's just like, so it's fascinating. Just the directing students are just kind of staring at you blankly because that seems so second nature. But of course, two different approaches to creativity, right? So yeah.
Well, and they're writing. It's so funny. They're writing just a story. Well, it's in here because that's what happens.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, well, yeah, but why?
Right.
Like, why is this important? Because that's how you get. Just as you say, how could I talk to? If I was directing you, how could I talk to you as an actor? If I didn't have some sense of your motivation and what you were trying to do, like, there's nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
You know?
And I would imagine a lot of the friction between early directors and early actors are directors going, no, just do it. And I was, no, what's the reason for me doing it? I can't give you the performance you want if you don't tell me why I need to be doing these things.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm walking over there.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm trying to get this thing.
And I'm sure directors are like, just fucking walk over there.
Just walk over there. So then he wrote down a synopsis. He wrote down the era. He said he wanted every scene to be specifically linked to this year, this time and place. He wrote down notes about imagery and tone. What do I want to see in this scene? He wrote down, and I think this is so important, he wrote down pitfalls. And what could go wrong in doing the scene and what could go wrong doing the whole movie. And here are some of the general ones. Cliche dialogue.
Yeah.
He didn't want any of the dialogue to sound like someone wrote it for a gangster movie. Familiar settings. He wanted to take people to settings they'd never been to before. Always use specifics, and in particular personal specifics, so that things had to come out of his life and his family. And then he wrote, "Don't lose the humanity." And I think you watch The Godfather, and it's clear that he didn't.
Yep.
I think that's one of these people are so real and so well developed. And of course, he said, avoid too much exposition, which is, the great bane of all screenwriters is how do I get the audience to understand what's happening without just telling them?
Yeah.
And he had a color coding system. So things for imagery was one color and things for character things was another color and the synopsis was another color. And what you could tell is the more important the scene, the more colors and notes the page had on it. And I'll give you a guess of what scene in this movie had the most notes.
Oh my God. The shooting of the police chief by Michael.
Sollozzo and McCoskey. That is the scene.
Yep.
And it's so obvious that is the key turning point of the film.
It's the fulcrum of the movie. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, we're going to talk a lot about it when we get to it. And here's the big thing. This is what finally sold him on doing this book, is when he went, at the core of this is the story of a king with 3 sons. And each son inherited a different part of his personality. Sonny inherited his violence. His heart and sensitivity was inherited by Fredo. And the cold genius was inherited by Michael.
Yeah.
And the big word, the one word for the whole movie is succession.
Oh,
this is
funny.
A movie. Yeah. Right.
Considering there's a show now on HBO. Yeah.
Which do you watch it? I've heard it's amazing.
I've watched the first episode, but there are shades obviously because it's he's a little more active and a little more of a flawed king that is being played there by Brian Cox. But I could see the similarities absolutely, and maybe that was the motivation for the title of the show.
So Paramount asked for a script that was 120 pages. The first script that Puzo and Coppola delivered is 173. They cut it down to 163. That's as short as they could get. As you mentioned, Coppola had to fight for Brando, and Paramount was like, no way, we're not doing it. They wanted Ernest Borgnine. And the other person really in the running was Danny Thomas.
Yeah.
Who apparently was going to buy Paramount to do this part.
He's going to pull his own Godfather move. I'm going to buy the studio and put myself in it.
Yeah. Because by the way, you know, most people listening probably don't know this. Danny Thomas was real powerful at this era.
Yep.
Here are 3 other names they considered for Vito, and I think you will be interested in all 3 of them. Maybe you already knew them. George C. Scott, Anthony Quinn, and Orson Welles.
Yeah. There's an alternate timeline where Coppola directs Welles as Vito Corleone, and either
Can't imagine.
either it's the greatest train wreck you've ever heard of in your entire life, or the greatest film ever made, period, by miles. I just have a feeling because I can't imagine Welles and Coppola, two alpha males with distinct points of views and strong points of views about how a film should be directed, working together without fireworks. I just don't see how it would be possible.
Yeah, I mean, well, and the thing is, this is one of those roles where Brando is Corleone. That's just it. I mean, everyone we've mentioned, including Ernest Borgnine. I don't know about Danny Thomas, but everyone else we've mentioned are like, these are really interesting actors.
Yeah, certainly.
You know?
Yeah.
And then finally, and again, Coppola just keeps pushing. He's just not quitting. And they finally say, okay, maybe Brando can do it if he works very cheap. He puts up $1 million bond.
Yeah, insurance, yeah.
And he does a screen test.
And screen test, that's the one. And you're just like, you're going to make Brando screen test? You're going to make
put up $1 million of his own money.
That I can accept because Brando was like Lindsay Lohan at the time. You know, as the people didn't really trust him, and he was getting into some situations there. And so they were like trying to protect their investment. So I can understand that. But the screen test, that's where I draw the line, man.
Well, and I love Coppola's responses. He says, sure, no problem. I'll get Brando to do that. And he knows he's never going to get all of it, but he figured if he agrees, he can keep the conversation going.
Right.
And then if he gets him, then he can renegotiate later on.
Right.
Of course, he doesn't tell Brando he's going to do a screen test. He tells Brando you're going to do a makeup test.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard the story. This is a very famous story. Goes to Brando's house. He's heard that Brando doesn't like a lot of loud noises, so he has all his crew. They're all only going to use sign language. They're not going to speak. He brings lots of little Italian cheeses and sausages and a glass of wine and things just so Brando has some things to play with.
Yeah.
They show up. There's Brando in a robe, long blonde hair, looking, because Brando's 47.
Yeah, that's all he is, ladies and gentlemen. He is 47. I will say this, maybe I'll get in trouble. He's younger than Steve and I at this point when he plays the Godfather. Insane.
Yeah. And Coppola described he looks like a surfer god at this moment. And, you know, apparently this is the transformation. He pulls his hair back. He puts some shoe polish in it. He starts walking around, starts picking up the little bits of food and starts saying, I think he would talk kind of like this. And then he grabs some Kleenex and he sticks them in his mouth and turns around and there's Vito Corleone.
Yeah, man. And that's a master at work. That's a master at work. Regardless of your feelings about Brando and the things he's done or whatever, that's a master at work, a genius. You know, and it must have been phenomenal for Coppola to be in the room and to watch magic happen like that. You know,
it's so crazy how I think about time differently now than I did when I was younger. Because when I was younger, On the Waterfront, which we did on the show, is 1954.
Yeah.
This is 1971, so it's 17 years later, which when I was a kid, that seemed like a really long time. And now that doesn't seem like that long. That's 2003. That didn't seem that long ago.
True.
And they show the film to Paramount and just Paramount goes, when he says, I'm going to show you the screen test of Marlon Brando. And they go, Brando will never get this part. And he shows it. That was Coppola's voice that he used when he's telling the story. And he shows it to him and they go, that is the most amazing thing I've seen, you know, and suddenly Brando's got the gig. Yeah. And then, and I'll talk about some of the other, we'll talk about some of the other casting when we get to some of these people. But the next thing he did was he gets Duvall, Pacino, Jimmy Caan, and Talia Shire. They're all up in the Bay Area. They're staying with Coppola. They're improvising. They're taking home movies. And then they do a big dinner with Marlon Brando. With Talia Shire serving food because that's what she was doing, a big soup to nuts Italian meal, the whole thing. And they put Brando at the head of the table, James Caan on one side, Al Pacino on the other side, Robert Duvall sitting there. And it sounds like all of them just fell into those characters, you know?
I imagine John Cazale would have been there as well.
Yes, he was there too. Yeah. Sorry. And they just like, Al Pacino's, you know, the way Coppola describes it is he's trying to impress Brando with his sensitivity and intensity. And Jimmy is trying to impress him with his jokes and big personality. Robert Duvall is quietly mocking Marlon Brando from across the table. Yeah. Can you imagine being there?
Oh, I would love it. I would have loved it, to be honest with you. I mean, that's everybody in the room is incredibly talented and has left a legacy in film. That's rare to find, Steve. That's rare to, especially because they're all so young and starting out. You know,
I mean, these are Titan actors. Yeah. Well, and they're with the greatest actor of his age, and these are some of the greatest actors of the next age.
Yeah.
It's so remarkable, all the things that are in this movie.
Yep.
And the cast being just one of them.
That's what I say. This is one of those movies that the movie itself is great, but all the stories around it are as equally great. And that you can't say that for a lot of classic films.
Speaking of it, would you like to go back to 1945 New York and enter the world of The Godfather?
I love America, so yes.
Well, and we start in the black, and we hear that incredible theme, and we see right at the beginning Mario Puzo's The Godfather, which was not in Puzo's contract.
Oh, wow.
That is Coppola's idea. And he says he did that ever since. So that's why we saw Bram Stoker's Dracula, is that he wanted those authors to get their credit.
What a difference than Wells. But go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And then we get to just what you say. I believe in America.
I believe in America.
It's one of the great openings of a movie, of all time.
I tell you something, Steve. This speech, monologue in essence, that is delivered this time in 2020 and what we're dealing with politically, what we're dealing with in our world, it struck me that this could be any of the disenfranchised minorities, the complaints that we've seen, the injustice of the justice system towards certain people because of the color of their skin or because of the fact that they're quote unquote real Americans versus immigrants or foreigners. It really struck me this time in a way that has never struck me before. I've always understood the point of the scene, being the son of immigrants. How can you not? But this just carried extra weight this time around, which surprised me, to be honest with you.
For me too, I had very much the same reaction. And the thing, and I'm going to hit it many times as we go through this film.
Yeah,
the Bob Evans choice of we should have an Italian American direct this movie. I just kind of went, yeah, okay, for years. And this time, because we have this idea today of inclusion.
Yeah.
And why is it important to have people who have that experience actually making the movie about that experience? And it's not that there weren't really good gangster movies made by those Jews in the 30s and 40s. They were good movies. It's not that Edward G. Robinson or James Cagney didn't play good gangsters or Bogart. They're awesome.
right.
But they could never do this because they never lived this life.
Yeah.
Just from the face of this actor who is Salvatore Corsito, this is like an actor you've never seen on screen before.
And the guts to put so many talented people in the movie, Steve, and you lead with in essence, like 25th on the call sheet actor and base your opening moment of your movie on this man's monologue. It's such like a gutsy decision, man.
It's like I didn't time it, but it's a 3, 4, 5 minute monologue.
Oh yeah,
Delivered
great.
And we said, and by the way, we've already talked about this monologue and how it came to be here when we did Patton.
Yes,
because what happened was the opening scene of the movie in the script was the wedding. And then one of Coppola's buddies came along and said, you know what? That opening of Patton you did, that was really cool. I think you should do something like that for this. And he remembered this character, Bonacera, who's in the book and this story. And he goes, oh, let's start with that. And man, we start in just this close-up in the black and the camera pulls back and we hear this immigrant story.
America has made my fortune and I raised my daughter in the American fashion.
And what I love about it is he loves America.
He does. Yes. As many, many immigrants do. We love my parents, the people where immigrants love this country. They come to this country to be a part of the myth, or the fabric rather, of America because of the myth that they've been told of what America is, what it symbolizes. And so they and especially at this time,
Well, and it is an amazing place.
Yes.
The lives my ancestors had here versus the lives they would have had in Germany is as Jews is like completely different.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, there's obviously problems of how we've treated immigrants consistently throughout this country, but we've also, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. We've also given these opportunities. And this man, he says that he raised his daughter in the American fashion. He wanted her to assimilate.
Yes.
And then she meets an American boyfriend.
Not an Italian. Not an Italian.
She goes out to movies with him. And I love that he says,
I didn't protest.
I didn't protest. Yeah.
Yeah. And then 2 months ago, he took her for a drive with another boyfriend. They made her drink whiskey, and they tried to take advantage of her. And his performance is so good.
Mm-hmm.
She resisted. She kept her honor. So they beat her like an animal.
And as this is happening, the camera is just slowly pulling back. It's all in one shot, which ain't easy for this actor.
No.
He's sitting there with Brando. And he has to give this huge monologue. That's a lot.
And Steve, as a director, I would argue, you would, and please correct me, normally in a monologue, the way that this is written, where it builds on the drama as the monologue goes along, you start away and
push
move
in.
closer and push
Absolutely.
in so that you feel the pain of this man deep in your bones, but that they pull away, or Coppola pulls away, is such an interesting decision that so works.
Well, and because he's doing something completely different, is because this is not a main character in the movie.
Yeah.
And what we're starting with him, and he is pulling us into this world. And so as we pull back and back, we're starting to see the space that we're in. And we should talk, by the way, the cinematographer is Gordon Willis.
Yeah.
Known as the Prince of Darkness because he got blacks to be as black can be. And the darkness in this film, particularly in this scene, is something that had really never been seen in film like this before, particularly on color film. Yeah. One of the things you do when you're exposing your film, you could have what's called detail in the black. And what that basically means is I shoot a shot, and you see like John is looking at me right now, and there's the TV behind me, and that looks black. Mm-hmm. If you took a picture of this and then you in post, and you could do it on your iPhone or something, turn up the exposure, suddenly you would see details in that black that you couldn't see before. So there's always some range. And there's also at the top end, there's details in the white. So if you lower the exposure, you could see some details when things were blown out. Yeah. Gordon Willis shot this so dark, there were no details in the black. There was no way. So and the reason they did it this way is they didn't want Paramount later on going, this is too dark, let's bring it up. Yeah. There is nothing there. It doesn't exist. That is how black the black is in much of this movie.
When I went to the hospital, her nose was broken. Her jaw was shattered, held together by wire.
Which is interesting because that's what happens to Michael later on in the film.
She couldn't even weep because of the pain, but I wept. Why did I weep? She was the light of my life.
And now suddenly this shot that is pulling back and back is now in an over the shoulder. And we see the hand of Marlon Brando. Yeah. It's so brilliant how they do this. And you even see and this is why Brando's a great actor, is even with his hand when he gestures to give him a drink is great acting.
I went to the police like a good American. These two boys were brought to trial. The judge sentenced them to 3 years in prison and suspended the sentence. Suspended the sentence.
They walked out that very day. Those bastards, they smiled at me. And that's the frustration again of the immigrant experience, the black experience, the person of color experience towards what would you assume would be these white Americans white American teenagers in 1950 or whatever it's set, 1940s, getting away with doing this to a young woman, and because she's a foreigner, because she's a daughter of immigrants, rather.
We literally, the last film we did was Mississippi Burning. This exact thing happens in Mississippi Burning, where they suspend the sentence of these guys that beat up this kid. Yep. And in our world today, there was the Stanford student who raped the woman in the alley and and he was a white wealthy guy, got a very small punishment. And you see, we've seen it just recently.
Yep.
African American who steals a candy bar gets 7 years.
Yep.
Then I said to my wife, for justice, we must go to Don Corleone.
And now we get Brando.
Yeah. And this is great because we hear his name and then we see him. It's a great reveal. Oh, such a great reveal.
By the way, Marlon Brando's holding a little cat, a kitten in this scene. That was something, according to Coppola, he just saw this cat and handed it to him.
Yeah, it was totally improv.
And Brando, the stuff he does, because you don't know what the cat's going to do, is great.
Why didn't you go to the police? Why didn't you come to me first?
And Bonacera doesn't want to answer. He says,
What do you want of me? Tell me anything, but do what I beg you to do.
he doesn't say it out loud. He walks up, he whispers in his ear.
And then we see the camera pulls back, and you see Brando in all his power kind of lean back and pull a little bit away from the guy, because he's legitimately offended or insulted that this guy would come and ask such a thing and whisper it in his ear and not understand he's asking for them to be killed, in essence. And he, in essence, looks at the Godfather as a hired gun. And that is so offensive to what Vito Corleone has built, the empire he has built. He's not a common hitman, you know?
Well, and this is the thing, is that Bonacera, he wants to be an American.
Yep.
He has chosen to not be in the world of the Godfather because Vito says,
We've known each other many years, but this is the first time you ever came to me for counsel, for help. I can't remember the last time that you invited me to your house for a cup of coffee, even though my wife is godmother to your only child. But let's be frank, you never wanted my friendship, and you were afraid to be in my debt.
I didn't want to get into trouble.
yeah, Bonacera didn't want to be a part of this.
Right, but this is what it is. And Steve, there's something working here. Damn, we're spending so much time on this molecule. But there's something that's working here, and that is, he said, I love America, right? He wanted to assimilate so much into the American life that he assumed some American traits in looking down at the Godfather, looking down at Italians who are in the mob. And only now is he coming to beg for justice. But before then, he didn't want to have anything to do with Vito, except to ask his wife to be godmother to his child, right? And that was maybe a culture thing, like, hey, you got to ask just in case, blah, blah, blah. We don't know the full connection other than
we don't know the story.
Right, other than that. And so it's just like this. So maybe this guy was kind of thinking he could cherry pick his connection or his involvement as long as it served him, just like sometimes America does. So it's just very interesting, the levels that this is working on, more than just the monologue of what's actually happening between these two men.
Well, and I think he's still using American tactics, which is he thinks, I can pay this guy money.
Right.
It's transactional.
Right.
I'm going to give you money and you're going to give me service.
Right.
And what Vito Corleone is like, no, this is a relationship.
Yeah. It's respect.
I don't do stuff for money.
Now you come to me and you say, Don Corleone, give me justice. But you don't ask with respect. You don't offer friendship. You don't even think to call me Godfather. Instead, you come into my house on the day my daughter's to be married and you ask me to do murder for money.
And he says, I ask you for justice. No. Your daughter is still alive. That's not justice, you know.
By the way, Brando was really impressed with the guy playing Bonacera.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
That's great.
And he's great. And this guy, this was an open call for actors.
Oh.
Coppola always he says he always wants to do open calls. Mm-hmm. Because there's these people out there that you would never see, you know, because they don't, this guy doesn't look like someone's going to have a movie agent and someone to be representing him. He's a theater actor and he came to an open call.
I get in trouble for saying this all the time, but people revere actors too much. There are many, many actors who never get the opportunity, who never get the shot, who never have things lined up for them that could be just as great as any of your favorite actors. The country, the world is full of them. So when we start to revere too much what an actor says or does or whatever, I always bristle at that, which is why some of the streaming stuff that's happening now, maybe some of these salaries will start to come down and maybe a little more humility starts to creep into the situation a bit. And we get a little more of the openness to other talents getting a shot at things and showing people that there are plenty of actors of multiple walks of life, colors, and gender, who can do what you've already seen the great ones do. They just never had the opportunity.
There's a whole other conversation. We're not going to have it, but
Right.
there's a lot of discussion today about the illusion of the meritocracy. That we have this belief that the best people rise to the top. If someone's rich and successful, they're rich and successful because they are the best.
Yeah.
You know, if someone's a famous actor, they're famous because they're best. And it's like, they might be great, but there are all these circumstances, many of which are just luck, that led them to be in the place where they can have those opportunities.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
might be just born to the right family, you know, or the right race, or the right, you know, in the right community to have the resources to become what they became.
Yep.
And other people might have done even better. And we see, by the way, we have Sonny, we have James Caan in the scene, and we have Duvall. Coppola wanted Duvall from the beginning. The studio said no. He had to audition a whole bunch of people, and finally Coppola broke him down and got Duvall. What an eye for talent this guy had.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I think we already mentioned that James Caan went to college with Coppola. That's how he knew James Caan. Yeah. We mentioned that in our discussion of Francis in our last episode.
Yes.
So then Bonacera still doesn't want to take the hint. He says, "How much should I pay you?" And you see the reaction on Brando's face.
Bonacera. What have I ever done to make you treat me so disrespectfully? If you'd come to me in friendship, then the scum that ruined your daughter would be suffering this very day. And if by chance an honest man like yourself should make enemies, then he would become my enemies. And then they would fear you.
I love that moment, man. Because when you watch this movie after you've seen part 2, it's really interesting to watch the chilling moments of menace that Brando is able to call upon for Vito. You realize, because like when you watch the movie, you fall in love with Vito Corleone. He's a man of principle.
Yeah.
No drugs. Loves his family. Even shames Sonny later on in the same office at this wedding. You know, which is the man who doesn't take care of his family is no kind of man. He has principles. And I imagine he probably never even cheated on his wife. He's got this kind of vibe to him that is very principled, and you love and respect him. But he was also able to maintain what he was able to maintain and build what he built because he has that gear within him that is truly menacing and unsettling. You know,
I'll tell you that I wasn't going to mention this till much later, but I'll tell you the thing that was the real biggest revelation to me this time that I just never saw to this level before is Vito Corleone's heart, his kindness, his gentleness, his understanding of humans, and Michael's lack of that.
That's the whole tragedy, is Michael's lack of compassion. He could have been as great, if not better, than his dad, but his lack of compassion is what is always his Achilles heel.
And I knew that before, but this time, man, there's so much, and even in the scene, you can see his kindness.
Yep.
Along with his scariness.
Right.
You know, they're right there. Yeah. And the moment of Bonacera saying, "Be my friend," like you could see what it costs him, you know?
And I love Brando's reaction, like a jilted lover that he's trying to win back. He goes, I don't know. And then he puts his finger out or hand out for him to kiss the ring. And it's brilliant. It's such a brilliant. See, he doesn't have to throw his weight around. He just speaks to him calmly, and then he even plays upon his, just plays upon him emotionally. Like you said, he knows human beings, and he knows how to play Bonacera, so Bonacera will do what's right. It's great.
Someday, and that day may never come, I'll call upon you to do a service for me.
And this is what I love too, is it's it's non-transactional.
Right.
It's not, I give you money and you do this thing. It's relationship oriented.
Yep.
We now have a relationship.
Right.
You know,
we're friends.
We're friends. I'm your godfather.
Yeah.
Until that day, accept this justice as a gift on my daughter's wedding day.
Which is a tradition amongst Italians.
Yeah.
That at least back then, right? There's the father, you could go into and request something of the godfather of that time and ask for something, and they could not refuse you because it was tradition.
I mean, I only know that because of this movie, but I'm assuming that it's based on real stuff. Mm-hmm. And then we hear him kind of give his orders.
Give this to Clemenza. I want reliable people, people that aren't going to be carried away. I mean, we're not murderers, in spite of what this Undertaker says.
And right, to see, so he knows how to play the Undertaker, but he also knows the Undertaker is beneath him in that way. But he, and it also mentions Luca Brasi for the first time.
Oh, that's right, because Luca is here to see him.
Yep.
And then we have this hard cut from this quiet, dark, slow-paced space to the wedding.
Yeah.
So the first scene is amazing. I think the wedding is where you see why only Francis Ford Coppola could have directed this movie. Because this is an Italian wedding.
Yeah.
This isn't my version of what I think an Italian wedding might look like. Right. This is an Italian wedding. It was shot on Staten Island. The idea for the Corleone compound, what they were modeling after, was the Kennedy compound.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So much sense.
Yeah, Dean Tavoularis, who he will later work with on all the Godfather movies and Apocalypse Now, pretty unknown production designer. He's the production designer on the film. There's sort of an old-fashioned, grainy, homey film look. That's what Gordon Willis saw immediately when he saw New York in the 40s. It's very gold.
Yeah.
It's very, feels old-fashioned.
Brown. Yeah.
Brown, yeah. And it's time to have the wedding pictures with the family. And what does Vito say? Where's Michael?
I'm not taking the picture without Michael.
Yep. And then we go out front, and there's some people taking down license plate numbers. Coppola had, like as I said, he had this notebook. And one of the things he had was how the people were dancing and little vignettes and little things that would happen at weddings that aren't in the book. And one of them is these people, Clemenza and Tessio, Abe Vigoda, and I don't have Clemenza's name right in front of me. Richard Castellano. And they are, again, characters like we've never seen in a movie before. Abe Vigoda, another guy from the Open Call.
What? Wow.
Yeah. And he has a face. I mean, he's just so great.
Does he get Barney Miller off Godfather? Damn,
totally.
I never thought about that. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay.
And we see Clemenza drink from a pitcher of wine. We see sandwiches getting thrown around, which, again, that was something that happened at weddings from Coppola's family.
Yeah.
We see Sonny, James Caan, talking to his wife. We obviously see some tension there. We see the moment, which it's all the little moments. It's the little girl dancing on Tessio's feet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just love that. And this is the thing. If you cut that out of the movie, would anyone know? No.
Right, right.
And yet, does that seem like just completely grounded in reality? Yes.
Yeah.
And do you like Tessio from seeing that moment? 100%.
Immediately. And just as to juxtapose, do you like that young kid that's under Clemenza's employ? From the beginning, you do not. His interactions when he grows past the line, try to touch Clemenza's cheek, and he's like, do your job. And then when he's getting the sandwiches thrown at him, and he's like, oh, you stupid jerk. And then later, when he's looking at the money going into the kitty or the dowry for Connie, and he's just like,
Madonna, if this was somebody else's wedding, sfortunato.
So already you know what is going to happen later on with this guy where he calls in sick. You know what that this dude is. And like you said, Steve, no exposition. Just seeing the scenes, you get an idea of this kid's character, so that when he's used later as a person who set up someone to die, the payment comes in full because he's a shitheel from the beginning.
So this is the character is Paulie.
Yeah, Paulie.
And here's a little story that I didn't know about this guy.
Oh,
so we're going to talk a lot. We'll get into how Al Pacino got cast. Needless to say, this is another person that Coppola had to fight for. This is the toughest battle, was to get Al Pacino to play Michael.
Yes.
Every single actor you can think of, and I'll get to them in a minute, was brought in. One of the actors that was brought in for Al Pacino for Michael was Robert De Niro.
yes.
Robert De Niro comes to audition for him. Coppola really likes De Niro, but doesn't think he's quite right for Michael. So he casts him as Paulie.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no.
I never knew this. And at the time, Al Pacino was supposed to be in a movie called The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight.
Right.
And when they finally cast him and Paramount agreed to him, Al Pacino stepped off the movie. You know who took this part in The Gang Who Couldn't Shoot Straight?
Robert De Niro.
Robert De Niro.
Wow.
And that's why he's not playing Paulie. And so and that is why he gets to play Vito Corleone in The Godfather 2.
Wow. What a
I
difference.
never knew that.
Oof. What a difference.
Right?
The guy they chose is so perfect for it. I can't imagine Robert De Niro doing that part.
Well, what a waste that would be of De
True.
Niro.
Very true.
We see Luca Brasi, who's practicing his speech.
Don Corleone, I am honored and grateful that you have invited me to your home.
Sonny heads out front. I love the way James Caan, even the way he walks, you get a sense of his character.
He's a sweat. He's a penis in a suit, man. He is all macho. He is all macho, cock slamming into things, trying to penetrate them for sure.
I was going to say this later, but it's funny you mentioned that. Do you remember one of the sensational racy things that's in the book that's not in the movie?
No, the size, isn't it the size of his penis?
Yes.
Well, it is in the movie.
Yes, it is in the movie.
Right.
It's a gesture that's coming up where we see his wife. John and I both did the gesture.
Yeah.
So you all could see it. The wife going bigger, bigger, biggest. Sonny is well hung.
Well endowed, which is why I can walk that way. Yeah.
And he goes out and, goes after the guys that are taking down license plates. They flash the FBI badges. He spits. There's reporters, photographers, paparazzi taking pictures. He grabs a camera, breaks it. Clemenza and Paulie have to hold him back, and then he just, with disdain, throws money down to pay for the camera.
I will say this, man. I mean, as much as I would love to be Michael, I have a lot of similarities with Sonny. Certainly, as a young man, and at times even as an older man now, those moments, I totally relate to Sonny. The spinning in authority, the losing a temper, then throwing some money at him. Like I felt connections to that character as a young child or a young teenager the first time I saw it.
I hope you take this in the way I intended. I wouldn't cast you as Michael. I would definitely cast you as Sonny.
Yeah.
Or I'd cast you as Vito.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm getting to be Vito as I get older, but certainly Sonny was in my 20s, absolutely.
I think you would be wasted as Michael. I think you would be much more. Yeah,
I'd be terrible as Michael. But my brother Michael is a perfect Michael. This is why the film resonates with our family so much. It's our Christmas tradition. All of us, like my sister Linda is Connie. My mom is who she was, just like the Godfather's mom. My dad, in our eyes, was like the Godfather. There's so many similarities. Plus, we're the children of immigrants. My parents immigrants. There's so much about this movie that has connections with the Roca family. And it's why we watched it so many times and why we loved it as much as we did. And Sonny is certainly who I was, passionate hothead. After I stopped getting beat up, I became.
He's a lot of a lot, and it's so funny.
Really is.
What's so funny is that you see what's problematic about him.
Yeah,
but you really like him.
You do.
You can't, he's so charismatic. We have another scene where another supplicant comes to the Don, and this is, the baker who's trying to get Enzo, back, who's, it doesn't matter what it is, but he's doing another favor, and we hear about the cake. Go ahead.
But it does matter because the person he is trying to lobby for is a person who will later help Michael when they try to kill Vito in the hospital. So it all connects, and it's really great. And the guy playing Enzo is fantastic.
Yeah, really good. And then Michael and Kay show up, Al Pacino and Diane Keaton. He's in uniform, which is very important. And the first thing they walk by is Luca Brasi, who's talking to himself.
Don Corleone, I am honored and grateful that you have invited me to your home.
And by the way, that's Lenny Montana. He's a professional wrestler, not an actor.
Yes, he is.
And here's what's interesting. So he was genuinely frazzled around Marlon Brando. Really did have trouble saying this stuff. And so the idea of him, they shot the scene in the office first. And that's what gives Coppola the idea to have him practicing the speech later at the wedding, before at the wedding.
That's perfect.
Because it was shot in the opposite order.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Coppola doesn't let the kids run through to kind of try to mess with Luca.
That is exactly what he did.
Yeah, of course. That makes so much sense just to see what can happen and what his reaction might be. Oh.
Well, because Coppola likes real stuff.
Yeah.
You know, that's why he hands Marlon Brando the cat. That's why he likes to go shoot in weather. If it's raining, if it's snowing, if it's windy, if it's a freaking hurricane in Apocalypse Now, he's like, let's go shoot in it. He likes those random elements because they make things real.
Yeah.
That man over there is talking to himself. See that scary guy over there?
He's a very scary guy.
Well, who is he? What's his name?
His name is Luca Brasi. He helps my father out sometimes.
I hinted at it before. Let's talk about casting Al Pacino.
Okay.
So Diane Keaton was cast right from the beginning. And the reason Coppola picked her was he felt that Kay was the most straight, boring character in the whole story. And so he wanted to pick an actor that was really quirky and odd and very much herself. And that is Diane Keaton.
Yep.
And this is the beginning of her amazing career too.
Yep.
And he wanted Al Pacino from the beginning. He'd seen him in some theater. He thought, this is the guy I want. Brought them to Paramount, and they said, are you kidding? We're going to give the star of the movie to not only an unknown, but a short, dark-haired, very ethnic-looking unknown. They say, we want Robert Redford.
Yep. And they want a Adonis to play an Italian. It's just so funny. Not that you can't have blonde, blue-eyed Italians, of course, or light-skinned Italians, but for the film that he was making, you had to feel that authenticity from moment one, from second one, and Michael radiates that so much more than Robert Redford would. Yeah,
he brings Al Pacino to L.A. They do a screen test. Paramount sees it, hates it. We're never casting this guy. Bring in other people. So they auditioned, just all of them. Every actor you can think of came in for this, including Dustin Hoffman, Martin Sheen. And the one that the studio finally said that they agreed to was James Caan. James Caan's going to play Michael. So they hire somebody else, Carmine Caridi, I think is how you say his last name. And he's going to play Sonny. James Caan's going to play Michael. But Coppola doesn't agree to this. And every time he brings in new actors, he brings Al back.
Yeah.
So every time they're watching, okay, I'm going to show you the latest screen test. Here's Dustin Hoffman. I got one more guy to show you after Dustin Hoffman. And the studio goes, what? We already said no to this guy. And then he did it again. And then he did it again. And he just kept bringing him back. The person who was cutting the screen tests is Marsha Lucas.
Oh.
Marsha Lucas, George Lucas's wife, is cutting them. And and Coppola goes to Marsha and says, look, you've looked at all these screen tests. Who should I cast? She's like, you got to cast Al.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. It's hands down Al Pacino has to play this part. He goes to Diane Keaton. Diane, you have acted in screen tests with all of these people. Who should I cast? She said, you have to cast Al. Like there's no question. Finally, after beating at Paramount over and over again, as he's done in all of these things, Paramount finally backs down and agrees to cast Al. And that means the guy they have cast to play Sonny can't be him because he's like 12 inches taller than Al Pacino.
Yeah.
James Caan's a little bit shorter, and so James Caan goes back to be Sonny.
And that works out. And so the thing is, this is why it's incredible to talk about all the stuff around the movie as well as the movie, because if you don't get Coppola at this stage in his career, when he's still young, when he's still trying to prove something, when he's got the ego, which he'll always have for the rest of his life, but like the cockiness, the bullheaded determination that he's right, this film doesn't end up being the classic that it is, and the second film as well. They don't end up being the classics that they are, that reverberate through the world of Cine-Files, through the world of film, without Coppola in this time, at this moment, willing, as a younger director, to fight the studio, to challenge the studio, to push the studio. Plus, we're in the 70s when studios were more open to the auteur stuff, you know? And I sometimes forget, Steve, you know, when we're desperate to pay bills or whatever, like you forget that sometimes fighting for the artistic integrity of something does matter, and you have to risk certain things.
Of course.
And in the end, the payoff might be worth it. You may not see it in your lifetime, but the payoff is worth it in the end if you're following the correct creative instincts, you know?
I think two things, because I mean, obviously I believe that fighting to make things the right way matters. I mean, you've watched me, you've known me long enough. I can be extremely stubborn over certain things.
Yeah.
I also think that, and I think, we wouldn't get Citizen Kane. You don't get Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
You don't get these great films without really stubborn people who said, all the directors we talked about, Kubrick, Ridley Scott, they've all are people that said, no, this is not good enough. Absolutely. But I also think that there are a whole bunch of people who are really stubborn who we never heard from again.
Yeah, right.
Because they lost the bet. Coppola happened to win the bet.
Yeah.
He and this is the thing, this came out because we just did our whole, episode just on Francis Ford Coppola, is that but here's what I really had an epiphany about it, is that we're just saying that he likes weather. He likes the cat. He likes the variations to get the best work out of his actors.
Yeah.
I think Coppola needs conflict to get the best work out of himself.
Great point. Yeah.
I think he thrives in situations where he is constantly battling to make it happen.
That's a good point.
That's where he's his best. The other thing I think is I totally think that they picked the wrong freaking scene to do a screen test with. because this is the thing, is the power of Al Pacino's performance is his quietness.
Yeah.
And so if you're a studio and you don't really understand that, what you would see, particularly in this scene, is how quiet and small his performance is.
Yeah.
Is that I think they should have done the scene where he said, I'm the one who's going to kill Sollozzo.
Mm-hmm.
That's a much more dynamic scene.
Yeah.
And you could see many more layers.
But that also requires like 4 or 5 other actors in the room.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, 4 or 5.
That's a fair point.
That's the thing But you can see these online. They're on YouTube. For anybody who's listening to us and hasn't watched any of these, you can watch some of these auditions on YouTube for The Godfather. They've posted them, which are just mind-blowing to watch sometimes.
And a lot of, these are great actors.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
You look terrific.
My brother Tom Hagen is Kay Adams.
How do you do?
And she asks about, how is this your brother? And he tells a story about basically he was a kid on the street that Sonny found, and he got adopted by the family.
He's a good lawyer. Not a Sicilian, but I think he's going to be consigliere.
What's that?
That's like a counselor, an advisor. Very important to the family.
Luca Brasi in The Godfather. We hinted at it before.
I am honored and grateful that you have invited me to your daughter's wedding. On the day of your daughter's wedding.
What's so funny is they're setting up this guy that is supposed to be the scariest guy in the entire movie. And yet you love him.
Yeah.
In this scene. Him stumbling over his words. And I love the and I hope that the first child will be a masculine child.
I love the ending. Don Corleone, he doesn't even say Corleone. He says, Don Corleone, I'm going to leave you now because I know you're a busy man. Just like that. There's not even a hint of real emotional connection for him. It's just he's honored that he was even asked to be at the wedding.
Yeah.
So he stumbles with this totally, nervous thing. And this is a man of incredible reputation as a killer.
Yeah.
For the family. So, for him to be shaken to his core, it's like probably a regular actor meeting Marlon Brando. You're So.
One of the things Coppola says over and over again is, how do I get the audience to understand a thing without telling them? Again, this is no exposition. Well, having this huge man who's supposed to be really scary be totally not only intimidated, but grateful to be in the presence and at the wedding of this other man makes us understand something about Vito Corleone through his behavior. We're back out of the wedding, and the bride and groom are dancing. And we should say that the bride, of course, is Coppola's sister, Talia Shire. Yep. She wanted the part from the beginning. Coppola was against it. Mm-hmm. Here's what he said. And I'm not saying this isn't true, and I'm not saying that Talia Shire is not a beautiful woman. But I am saying is that often when you listen to the stories that people tell about things, that is the story they told. It isn't necessarily the whole story. He said he was against it because he thought she was too beautiful to play the part. And that Connie should be someone that is unattractive and is only being married because she's the daughter of the Don.
Oh my gosh.
And that's just one where I went, I think there's more story there.
What do you think? What's your feeling? What are you thinking?
I really don't have an answer. Mm-hmm. That one, it's like there's another one, we'll come to it, is that because I watched the commentary, listened to the commentary, because I read The Notebook. I heard there was just recently a Fresh Air interview with Coppola that I listened to. He told the same story over and over again, and it has to do with Clemenza making tomato sauce, and later on when they're going to the mattresses.
Oh, yeah.
And he says that this is what I learned from Mario Puzo. He said he learned never to hang out with mobsters, to only do research, stay away from them. He said he learned to use personal things from his life, because Mario Puzo loses a lot of personal things, which we'll get to some of them.
Yeah.
And he also, and then he tells this story. And I had written the scene where he said, you brown some garlic in the pan. And Mario said, Francis, gangsters don't brown, they fry. And it's like, why? I literally heard Coppola tell that story 5 times.
Yeah.
And I'm just going, and to me, it's such a thin story that I think there was way more conflict between Mario Puzo and Coppola than he is letting out. I have no evidence for this whatsoever.
Yeah. Maybe.
But, yeah. Anyway, that was a long digression. I love the moment where mom comes up and sings at the microphone.
Oh, yeah.
And then the old guy comes up and sings. And by the way, it's Carmine Coppola is conducting all this music. This is his music. And there's just a feeling of like, this is a real Italian wedding. And when it's in Italian, we know that the old guy is singing some kind of racy something or other. You can tell, and everyone's laughing. Yeah. Oh, it's great. And Coppola insisted that he wanted a band that could really play rather than actors pretending to be a band.
Yeah. And I want people to remember this whole everything in the wedding and juxtapose it later to Nevada in Godfather Part 2. That band that doesn't know any Italian music, that band that's this is Michael changing or ingratiating himself further into America in Godfather 2. And the simple differences between the bands are those things that a great director pays attention to as symbolic, but doesn't call attention to it, just hopes you'll catch it in when you're watching the movies.
Well, and this is the thing. I think this wedding scene, which is really long. I mean, obviously we're spending a ton of time talking about it, but it's a really, really long scene. But by the end of it, you feel part of this family.
And you know everybody.
Yep.
You know everybody's place in the hierarchy. You know pretty much all the main characters' personalities and the connections that they all have with each other.
It's a remarkable. And the thing is it a really long sequence? Totally. Is it boring? Not even a tiny bit.
Nope.
Sonny goes off with the bridesmaid. And then we get screams because who is showing up but Johnny Fontaine?
What is that outside?
And this is, of course, the rumored to be based on Frank Sinatra guy.
Yes. Yeah, for those who don't know the story, this is supposed to be Sinatra, and Sinatra was super pissed at Puzo. Apparently, Sinatra was eating one time, and Puzo, after the book had become a success, and the movie had come out, he came up to try to shake Frank's hand, and Frank would not look up from his food and said, "Get the fuck away from me," basically, because... Basically, he based this on the From Here to Eternity story of Frank at this time, right before he got From Here to Eternity, a few years before. His music had stopped selling. The Bobby Soxers weren't coming. His voice, he was singing songs with dogs to try to sell. Like, it was a bad time, and he was suicidal, and he almost killed himself. His manager found him when he had turned the gas on and put his head in the oven. And he was dating Ava Gardner, which was a tumultuous relationship. And it was Ava who called the studio. I think it was Harry Cohn, who was the head of the studio, or was it Roy Cohn? It was Harry Cohn, and said to him, "You got to cast Frank." The studio did not want to cast Frank in no way, shape, or form. Sinatra was poisoned, and it was Ava Gardner who put herself on the line to get Frank Sinatra cast in From Here to Eternity, which of course ended up winning him an Oscar, and it was a rebirth, a renaissance of Sinatra, which led him into the Capitol years and success forever after. And so this is the correlation to what you see. Even though it kind of looks like Dean Martin, it's more or Tony Bennett, it's more the correlation to Sinatra here, who is Italian, by the way.
And has some rumored
mob
connections
ties. To mob ties, yes, of course.
I'm not saying anything. I know I don't want to get in trouble.
Just in case anyone's listening who might put us in trouble.
So
allegedly.
Here's what I didn't know. So the actor playing Johnny Fontane is Al Martino.
Yeah.
And he got Albert Ruddy hired him for the part. He's a club singer and fairly well known, but not a big star.
Right.
And then when Coppola got hired, he dumped Al Martino because he wanted Vic Damone to play the part. And so Vic Damone comes in, and this is what it says on Wikipedia. So I never heard this story before, but this on Wikipedia, it says that Martino went to his godfather, Russell Bufalino.
Oh.
And Bufalino put pressure on Al Ruddy, and they dumped Vic Damone and brought him back in. It just sounds so crazy that could be true, but that's what Wikipedia says.
I don't know.
Mike, you never told me you knew Johnny Fontane.
Sure. You want to meet him?
Huh? Oh, sure.
My father helped him with his career.
He did?
By the way, some of this part of the scene was shot at night. This conversation with Kay and Michael is shot night for day.
Wow.
And I would never have known it. It's done really, really. And of course, it's because they're under huge time pressure.
Yeah.
They didn't have a lot of money, and they had to get this stuff done. Yeah.
Well, when Johnny was first starting out, he was signed to this personal service contract with a big band leader. And as his career got better and better, he wanted to get out of it. Now, Johnny is my father's godson. And my father went to see this band leader. And he offered him $10,000 to let Johnny go. But the band leader said no.
And I love the way Michael says this line.
So the next day, my father went to see him, only this time with Luca Brasi. And within an hour, he signed a release for a certified check of $1,000.
How'd he do that?
My father made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
That is ranked as the second most memorable line in film history.
What's the first?
The first is, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
That totally makes sense.
The third
is,
I could have been a contender.
Oh, yeah.
Brando. So, and of course, it's probably Brando saying, I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. Not Al Pacino saying it. But that means Brando has 2 out of the top 3 best lines. This line comes from Mario Puzo's mom.
Oh, an offer he can't refuse?
I'll make you an offer. I'll make him an offer I can't refuse.
Wow.
There are several of the most memorable lines in this movie come from his mom.
Wow.
Yeah. Apparently she was a lot of a person.
Luca Brasi held a gun to his head, and my father assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on the contract.
And this is, once again, another Sinatra connection, because what later on happens with Johnny Fontane, where he's like, I'm trying to get that part in the picture. That's the From Here to Eternity story.
Right.
This story is Sinatra when he wanted to break away from, I think it was Tommy Dorsey's band, and he wouldn't let him out because he just signed a 5-year contract. And Sinatra wanted to go solo. So the rumor was that Sinatra at this point, thanks to his mom, Dolly, who was in politics and understood, the kind of connections that the mob might have there in politics, she made friends with some people. They, of course, supported Sinatra. And at the time, apparently, some people visited and had him sign that contract to get Sinatra released so he could go and be a solo artist. That's the rumor, right? Did it happen
again?
But that's
we're not saying anything.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. And he says, and this is what's so interesting. He says to Kate, "That's a true story," and she has a reaction, and he says,
"That's my family, Kate. It's not me."
This is the whole movie. I mean, at least for Michael's journey.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is, I don't think Michael later on would have told any of this story.
Yeah.
He's not going to tell this story about his father threatening someone with murder to someone outside the family.
Yeah.
But this person, who really genuinely, I think, doesn't want to be part of this. That's his whole plan. That's part of him separating himself, is that he does tell Kay.
Tom, go to the front center. Tell him to come to the office.
And this is where having these actors like Robert Duvall, you could see in his face that he knows Sonny's with a girl.
Right.
And what am I going to do and how am I going to handle this? And then Fredo.
My brother Fredo, this is Kay Adams.
Beautiful, soft, sweet, drunk Fredo.
This is my brother Mike.
Are you having a good time?
Huh? Yeah, this is your friend, huh?
It's a great introduction to his character, and that he kisses Kay and says I love that he introduces Mike. This is my brother Mike. It's so funny. Mm-hmm. Coppola saw him on a show off Broadway. That's how he got this part.
Yeah,
and we should say he has one of the most amazing and brief careers in film history.
Yep.
Yeah.
Every film he was in, I think, was nominated for Best Picture. Mm-hmm. Every film.
It's this, Dog Day Afternoon, Godfather 2, and Deer Hunter.
Deer Hunter. Yep.
Yeah. And then he passed away.
Yeah. If you want to watch a great documentary on him, HBO did a documentary on him a few years ago with Meryl Streep involved, in everybody, Pacino, everybody talking about how much they loved him, because Meryl Streep was, I think they were in a relationship, or they had gotten married, and they were together, and she was there to nurse him up until his death from I think it was a brain tumor or brain aneurysm,
something like that.
Yeah, and it's sad because he's such an incredible actor.
He's great. Johnny is basically telling the story of woe that you just described. He wants to get this part, and he's weeping and broken, and Tom is trying to get Sonny, who's having sex with this bridesmaid, and there's an opera singer singing at the wedding. That's Coppola's cousin. And Johnny is totally broken down in front of Vito and says,
"Oh, Godfather, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do."
You can act like a man! What's the matter with you?
You can act like a man! What's the matter with you? What's up with that nonsense?
It's so funny because Brando has been so constrained.
Yeah.
So quiet up to this point that this moment of slapping him and mocking him is just so funny.
And I don't want people to get mad, but this is toxic masculinity for sure. But it is also from that time, the tradition of that time.
Of course.
Crying was not something that was necessarily accepted amongst quote unquote real men. So yeah.
Of course, like this is totally, totally real for the time.
You spend time with your family?
Sure I do.
Good. Because a man that doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man.
Mario Puzo's mom said that.
Wow. And he's saying that as Sonny comes in the room after he's had, carnal relations with the woman, who of course end up being the mother of Andy Garcia in Godfather 3. So that's the connection there. And but he knows that Sonny is a terrible fucking husband, but it's his firstborn. In the tradition, he's not going to go after him too hard.
Well, and it's funny, watching it this time is the first time I caught that. I never
really?
caught it before.
Oh, wow.
I was just paying attention to him talking to Johnny, and it was only watching it this last time that I went, he knows Sonny's sleeping around. He's giving, the real message is going to his son.
Yes, it is, because he even looks back before he says it.
Never caught it before.
Quick glance.
I want you to rest well, and a month from now, this Hollywood big shot's gonna give you what you want.
Too late. They start shooting in a week.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
By the way, when he sends Johnny Fontaine out, an extra, Coppola I never noticed this before, but an extra accidentally pops in a frame, realizes she's on camera, and backs out of the shot. And this is exactly the kind of thing that drives directors and editors nuts that nobody notices.
Bro, Lindley will tell you stories of me stopping shows or stopping movies to show you extras overdoing it in scenes. And I go, how the fuck did you allow this to happen? Like, it drives me. There's nothing that drives me more nuts when I'm watching a movie than noticing an extra who's overdoing it to get attention. As if some casting director is going to go, that over actor I saw in that scene? Exactly. I'm going to cast that person as the lead. And
let's make them a star.
Let's make them a star. I know they tried to totally grab spotlight away from the people who actually had lines, but let's make them a star. They seem like they understand it. It's the fucking dumbest thing ever, man.
I'll tell you, the worst extra I ever had on anything I ever directed was my mom.
Oh, no.
We did a sitcom. Matt Garcia and I, was our senior project or master's thesis at film school, and it's like a traditional 4-camera sitcom, and we just needed a crowd to come in at the end of the show, and she is terrible. I know, Mom, you're probably listening to this, and I love you. You're an amazing person, but I would never cast you as an extra again. But again, only I'm
sorry.
noticing it. Only I'm noticing it. I just wish I hadn't put her center in the frame. Like if I put her behind someone, it would have been better.
The views of Steve Morris or Steve Morris is alone.
Again, I'm very sorry, Mom. I love you. We see the giant cake that the baker has made. It's ridiculous. And then we hear, and this is so important, we hear about Carlo, the guy she's marrying, and Tom's like, well, so we're going to give him a big job. And he says,
never. Give him a living, but never discuss the family business with him.
Yeah, he's an outsider. He's an outsider.
And I think Vito knows from the beginning that this guy is not to be trusted.
Yeah, he's married into the family.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's not going to say no to his daughter. So
yeah. And this is the first time, too, we hear about some guy named Salazzo that's waiting on an answer.
We'll discuss him when you come back from California.
When am I going to California?
I want you to go tonight. I want you to talk to this movie big shot and settle his business with Johnny. Now, if there's nothing else, I'd like to go to my daughter's wedding.
Why does Michael pull Kay into the family photo?
That's just because he loves her and he wants her to be a part of this. And I also think it's a Coppola decision because Kay obviously represents America, white wasp America, and she is the innocent America, right? Even the line later on in the film when he says, "Oh, Michael, do you know how naive you sound? Senators and presidents don't have men killed." And he goes, "Really, Kay? Who's the naive one here?" You know, and
one of my favorite lines in the whole movie, by the way.
Yeah, because it speaks to what Coppola is trying to say, this idea of, because remember, we're still in the throes of Vietnam when this film comes out. So this idea of American exceptionalism is getting decimated by the Vietnam War and getting all the systemic racism, systemic injustices are all being exposed there for people to see through real events going on in the late 60s, early 70s and beyond. And so this is what Kay represents, this idea of America. Also what Michael wants to do. Michael wants to become American and less Italian. There are those children that exist in immigrant families or families of immigrants where they want to have less to do with their beginnings and want to assimilate into America more, essentially becoming a white version of their race. You know, and so that you see that all the time.
Let me ask this question, a different question. Does Michael love Kay?
I don't think Michael is capable of love as we would standardly know it. I think this is the thing. Michael is at no point in any of the films do you ever see a warm moment with Michael. Even when he's talking to his son about the drawing in Godfather 2, there's not that extra connection that you would have seen Vito have with a young Michael or a young Sonny. There's just not that connection, or a young Fredo, which we see in Godfather 2, the connections he had with his kids. There's just not that warmth, and because Michael doesn't possess it. Michael is an introvert in that way. He is a standard introvert.
Well, introverts can have love and warmth.
I guess I would say he's an extreme version of an introvert in that for him, everything is guarded, everything. And so he's not going to let out too much. Even when he finally tells Tom his feelings about him, in Godfather 2, near the end of the movie, it's a hard-won journey. And even Tom says to him, "I've always wanted to be thought of as a brother by you, Michael," which is mind-blowing at the age that they're at and the amount of years they've spent together. Tom still doesn't know if Michael has accepted him as his brother. So that tells you, like, Michael keeps his feelings so hidden, or he has none and no ability to convey them. So I think he loves her as much as he can conceive of the word love at this stage. When Apollonia dies, which is the first time Michael really kind of opens up his feelings, drops his guard, he's a completely different person in Italy. I think that's the death of Michael's. I think it's the death of his compassion.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I think he does love Apollonia. I think
yes, that is 1,000% loves Apollonia.
I think he loves. I think he's Bonacera. I think he's going, I believe in America. Yeah. And I think Kay is the symbol of the life he wants to have.
Yes.
I think he's constructed a future in which he will be an American.
Yep.
And not a Corleone.
Yeah. Not a gangster, not a mob guy, none of that shit.
Right? And with all of his discipline and all of his focus, he is committed to making that happen. And so he pulls her into the picture.
Right. And we find out later, he signed up for the war without telling his dad. He makes his own decisions, and this is what makes Michael Michael. And even later, when Vito's in the garden with him near the end of the movie, he says to him, I never wanted this for you. I wanted another life for you. He respected that his son didn't want to be a member of the mafia, that he wanted to be something else, a governor or a senator or something like that. He respects that his son had that dream, but also feels tragedy around it because the circumstances didn't allow him to do it.
What's so interesting is I think we could speculate that if Vito doesn't get shot, that Michael he would have married Kay. Yeah. He might very well have been a senator.
He absolutely would have been the senator. Absolutely. And a lifelong senator.
But I don't think he would have been happy there either.
Maybe.
The only world in which I can conceive of him being happy is with Apollonia.
Yeah. Yeah. Fully happy. Fully passionately happy. Yeah.
Himself and free and because I think he's trying to create an identity for himself.
Yeah.
That he could then inhabit.
And it's ironically only in killing a police chief and killing the main rival of his family is he truly his feelings are truly exposed for his father. Because I guess I should correct myself. There are moments of connection in the movie. There are moments of tenderness when he's talking to his dad in the hospital, and then with Apollonia. Those are the moments of true connection, and those all happen after his father's life is threatened. That's when it becomes real for Michael, and then all of a sudden his feelings are out there for everybody to see.
Let's go to Hollywood. We've managed to make it out of the opening sequence. This sequence is so great, and it's so peculiar. Yeah. And part of what makes it so great is you actually have a movie star in Robert Duvall, who we're following, and he shows up at the studio, which is Waltz Pictures or whatever, and we meet Jack Waltz, who I love. He's got the pipe and the smoky jacket, and we're on the movie set. And I love every single thing about what Robert Duvall does in this sequence.
He's so patient, man. Like a lawyer, like a good lawyer,
Well, and he's so willing, he's so unaffected by all the histrionics that Waltz is going to throw at him.
Are you trying to muscle me?
Absolutely
Now
not.
listen to me, you smooth-talking son of a bitch. Let me lay it on the line for you and your boss, whoever he is. Johnny Fontaine will never get that movie. I don't care how many Dago, Guinea, Wop, greaseball, goombas come out of the woodwork.
Well, what does he say?
He says, I'm German-Irish.
German-Irish. Well, listen to me, my Kraut Mick friend. And I was like, holy shit.
And I love that Duvall, he's so above it. It just washes right over him.
Yeah.
I'm going to make so much trouble for you, you won't know what to hit you.
Waltz, come a lawyer. I have not threatened.
I know almost every big lawyer in New York. Who the hell are you?
I have a special practice. I handle one client. Now, you have my number. I'll wait for your call.
And then I love that he shakes his hand and says,
by the way, I admire your pictures very much.
He's a great lawyer, man. No, there's no emotion to it. Just have to get the job done.
This is the thing that I thought of this time. Is like you have these two actors in particular in Duvall and Pacino who will make a reputation as these hyperbolic, intense, loud, huge characters, and they are both playing these really restrained people in this movie that made them both stars.
That's a great point.
You know, and I think part of it is that we know that they have it in the tank, and they're holding it in.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then we get some more jazzy Hollywood music, and we cut to this crazy mansion in the hill. All of this is second unit. Duvall and the guy playing Waltz, whose name I don't have in front of me, they weren't there. This isn't them.
Why don't you say you work for Corleone, Tom? I thought you were just some cheap two-bit hustler Johnny was running in trying to bluff me.
I don't like to use his name unless it's really necessary.
That man carries weight all the way in the West Coast, Steve.
Well, I love that there's a bartender at the pool.
Yeah, that's rich.
Man, I want to have a pool and just have a bartender just in case I walk by, and I need a martini at the last minute. And we go and see the horse.
They are $600,000 on 4 hooks. I'll bet Russian Tsars never paid that kind of dough for a single horse.
$600,000, and he's not even going to race him. He's going to put him out to stud. And then it's dinner.
Johnny Fontaine never gets that movie.
And I love his reason is that it'll make him a star.
I'm going to run him out of the business. And let me tell you why. Johnny Fontaine ruined one of Waltz International's most valuable proteges.
And then he tells this story about this young actress that he invested all this money in and all this time in. She was going to be a big star. And I love this.
And let me be even more frank. Just to show you that I'm not a hard-hearted man, that it's not all dollars and cents. She was beautiful. She was young. She was innocent. She was the greatest piece of ass I've ever had, and I've had them all over the world.
And what I love is Duvall just nothing.
Yeah.
This guy's just doing all this stuff, and Duvall's just patiently listening.
She threw it all away just to make me look ridiculous. And a man in my position can't afford to be made to look ridiculous.
And he's literally yelling in Duvall's face at this point. And it's funny, he welcomed him in. He was very warm to him. He was charming to him. Mm-hmm. He's saying, like, can we negotiate? And then he ends just as insulting as he was at the movie studio.
Yeah.
Now you get the hell out of here. And if that goomba tries any rough stuff, you tell him I ain't no band leader.
Because he knows that story too.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, I heard that story.
And Duvall, again, smooth, says,
thank you for the dinner and a very pleasant evening.
And heads out.
Yep. And of course, Harry Cohn he's standing in for Harry Cohn, and he's talking about Ava Gardner. He's talking essentially about, and in the extended version, which I'm glad they cut out, as soon as Duvall leaves, you see an older, what would you call it? An older headmistress or whatever they called them back then, walk out with a girl who's like 14. Ugh. It's a very chilling scene. And then you realize, this is the kind of shit and when you see Judy, the Judy Garland movie, there's inferences to that as well. And there's like, fuck, man, there's so many dirty people that were in Hollywood back then. Might even be now, but still.
Yeah.
It's an uncomfortable scene. And I'm glad they cut it out because you don't need it. You get it. You move forward. Yeah.
We've arrived at one of the most famous scenes in film history. It's morning. It's quiet. We hear the sound of crickets. We're looking at a wide shot of the mansion. Again, this is all shot second unit. Gordon Willis isn't here. We dissolve in, and we hear the Godfather theme. Initially, this had really, really intense, scary music. And it didn't work. And Walter Murch had the idea that it needed to start smaller and quieter. So Walter Murch, great editor of all time, he didn't actually edit picture on this movie, he edited sound only. And so he put in the crickets, and then he had the idea that instead of starting with this really scary music, to start with the Godfather theme. And then the scary music rises up as we go into the room. And you have both pieces of music playing at the same time, which is what gives it that dissonant, uncomfortable, grating sort of quality. We go from the romantic Godfather theme into this room. This is one of the most disturbing moments in film history for me.
1,000% agree with you. 1,000% agree with you. And it's supposed to be, right? Because it's a slow progression to this moment.
We're in this beautiful bedroom. Waltz is asleep in his bed. The sheets are satin. He starts to stir. And you notice just something on the sheet that doesn't seem quite right. And he moves, and the more he moves, the more you see that the sheets are stained. And then you go, wait, is that blood? And at that moment, he feels something strange. And he looks at his hand and sees his hand covered in blood. This moment, before we get to the next moment, I think he's waking up going, is this my blood?
Or,
you know what I mean? Or is it someone else
the young girl's blood whose maybe her virginity I took? I don't know. But yeah,
that virginity thought never occurred to me.
Yeah. Well, he's a sick son of a bitch. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what it is because you have much more. I'd seen that shot, the cut scene, but I think that sounds like it was much more in your head. Yeah. I never thought about that again, just because well, that doesn't belong there. And then
no.
This is not appropriate. And then he slowly pulls back the sheet, and now we see it's not just a little blood.
Yeah.
It is he is bathed in blood.
Yeah.
And then he pulls the sheet back farther, and there is the horse's head. This guy did some great screams.
He did. And it's a great cuts by Coppola.
Yes.
You know, to convey as he moves out of the room. It's great cuts. Until he's out.
It is really disturbing. By the way, in the book, the horse was like on the bedpost.
Yeah.
And Coppola said he actually misread it as in the bed.
Oh,
and that's how it
shit.
ended up in the bed. It is a real horse's head.
Oh.
That is a dead horse.
Yikes.
And of course, we know that Coppola slaughtered a big bull for real in Apocalypse Now. And so he got in trouble for this one too. And this was actually a horse that they got at the pet food factory. This was a horse that was going to be slaughtered anyway.
Oh, okay.
So they got this horse after the horse had already been slaughtered to make, puppy chow.
Right.
And they put it on dry ice, but it was hot on the set. And that's a horse's head this guy had to be in a bed with on a hot set all day.
Nasty.
That is acting can be a nasty, nasty business.
It's a nasty business, Mr. Hobbs. Nasty business.
And then from this moment, we dissolve to a very serene looking Don Corleone.
Well, I don't know, Steve. To me, it's a great dissolve because he looks like he's savoring the screams of Waltz.
I think it totally could be interpreted
right.
that way.
He's just like, and then he's going into his conversation, which I think is great.
Well, and I think what's so great about this is, again, we go back to, the questions of what is the point of the scene? Why is this scene here? Why does it exist in the movie? Right. Why do we need to go to Hollywood? Why do we need Johnny Fontaine? These aren't important characters in the film.
Yeah.
But you've met Vito Corleone and the family, and you've even been to some degree seduced by them, and that you really like them. And now we go and see this unbelievably brutal thing.
Yeah.
So now when we come back to Vito Corleone, our feelings about him are much, much more complicated.
Great point. Yeah.
Because now we know what this guy is really capable of.
Yeah.
It's profound. And now we're hearing about Sollozzo.
His business is narcotics. He has fields in Turkey where they grow the poppy. And in Sicily, he has the plants to process them into heroin. Now he needs cash. He needs protection from the police, for which he gives a piece of the action.
And while this is happening, we see Sollozzo kind of coming upstairs. And so we're kind of linking the time of the meeting with the time now. Oh. And Vito asks his son, he asks Sonny, what do you think?
There's a lot of money in that white powder.
Then he asks Tom, who gives a much more complicated answer.
Now we have the unions, we have the gambling, and they're the best things to have. But narcotics, it's a thing of the future. Now, if we don't get a piece of that action, we risk everything we have. I mean, not now, but 10 years from now.
And then Sonny turns to Vito and says, so what's your answer going to be, Pop? And Vito does not answer.
No.
Sitting behind Marlon Brando in this shot is a bottle. And this is a bottle of anisette, which is, an Italian liqueur. And Coppola made this bottle and he put the tape label on it himself because his uncles and all of his family, they always made their own anisette, and that they always had a bottle that looked like this, and they always labeled it with a piece of masking tape. Yeah. And so Coppola did this himself to make sure, because that was correct. And how many people in this watching this movie are going to notice that detail?
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
No, I never noticed it.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, is this again is like only an Italian-American director would do that, and only Francis Ford Coppola would fight and do the extra work for that tiny little piece of authenticity.
Yeah.
By the way, Coppola still makes his own anisette. Now we have the scene with Sollozzo.
I need a man who has powerful friends. I need $1 million in cash. I need, Don Corleone, those politicians that you carry in your pocket, like so many nickels and dimes.
This is Brando's first scene on the shoot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the actor is Alighieri, who spoke Sicilian.
He's great, Alighieri.
He's so interesting in this scene.
Mm-hmm.
In the first year, your end should be $3-4 million. And then it would go up.
Now, what is the interest for the Italian family?
My compliments.
because Vito obviously has good information.
Yeah.
Brando's so great in this scene.
Why do you come to me? Why do I deserve this generosity?
And then Sollozzo insults him.
If you consider $1 million in cash just finance, salute, Don Corleone.
What's the insult? See, I think it's a compliment.
Because he's saying to him, because Brando changes his face when he says that. He takes it as an insult because he is commenting on money, in the amount, much like Bonacera did with the how much should I pay you? And so
I see what you're saying.
So for Brando to speak about money so openly, it's disrespectful. Right. And so I mean, it's not Brando. I'm sorry, for Vito to speak about it so openly, it's disrespectful. So when he says it that way, if you watch Brando, he stares at him for a minute and then does the whole thing and he turns him down in that moment. And that's the thing with Vito Corleone. You can't fuck up the meeting. You can't fuck up once because there are plenty of people who ask for an audience with Vito. But if you mess up once or he senses that you're not trustworthy or you're a bottom feeder or you're one of those people using him, if he doesn't see the benefit of it, he cuts it immediately. And in that moment, when he says, if you think of salud, he's almost disrespecting him by almost making fun of the money a little bit. In that moment, I think Vito goes, yeah, I'm not working with this clown.
So it's funny because I interpreted it very differently, but I definitely think you're right. Do you think that he would have taken the deal if this moment hadn't happened?
I think he'd have considered the deal more if this moment hadn't happened. I think if he felt this man was a man of respect, as a man who understood the way things work, I think he'd have had a little more consideration for it. He might not have said yes, but in acting, it's not always booking the part; it's booking the room. And so I think he didn't book the room and lost the part. And he could have had a shot at the part if he had booked the room. And if not this part, a part down the road. And so I think this is where he loses him completely as a businessman or as a possible connection. Remember, he's all about relationships. So if he doesn't trust you, he's not going to be in a relationship with you.
So it's so funny because, again, we're going really slow, but this is The Godfather, and this is one of the great films of all time, and this is why.
Yeah.
I don't think Sollozzo intends to insult him. I think he is saying, wow, if you could just talk about $1 million like that, man, well done.
Well, it's because Sollozzo's a bottom feeder. He's down at the bottom. He to him, $1 million is like, holy shit.
Yeah.
But
what I
Vito,
didn't see,
is nothing.
But what I didn't see, which I actually think you're totally right, is that Vito takes that as an insult. Yeah. Like, why are you bringing up money like that? That's not, because money's not important. 100% you're right, and I didn't see that before. Yeah. In my opinion, Vito knew he was never going to take this deal before he walked in.
Probably right, but he gave him the courtesy of the time because other people spoke for him and members of the five families, whatever. Yeah.
Because if Vito really wanted to do a deal, someone saying something insulting to him wouldn't stop him.
Right, like Bonacera, right? He made Bonacera come to him, and eventually, yeah, you're right. That's a good point, Steve.
Because he's going to do what's right for the family. Right. He's not going to get emotionally involved in a thing. Sonny would, but he won't.
Right, which Sonny does.
I said that I would see you because I heard that you were a serious man to be treated with respect. But I must say no to you, and I'll give you my reasons. It's true, I have a lot of friends in politics, but they wouldn't be friendly very long if they knew my business was drugs instead of gambling, which they regard as a harmless vice, but drugs is a dirty business.
By the way, I had to say something to people because you'll never see this, but here's what's happened as John and I have been doing this, is that frequently I'm reading the lines of these characters, and much of the time I will actually cut to Brando saying the line. Mm-hmm. But what none of you know, but I've been observing, is as I've been reading Brando's lines, John has been silently performing the part. And it's been so awesome to see John do all the gestures and facial expressions for the line I am saying.
I even almost did the wipe. If you notice, he wipes Sollozzo's pants. He wipes the knee of Sollozzo's pants, which is another form of respect and disrespect at the same time.
Well, Vito Corleone has an unbelievable understanding of people.
Yes.
And is very sensitive in how he does those things. Yeah.
And he's never wrong, Steve. Yeah.
Never wrong. Absolutely.
Don Corleone.
It doesn't make any difference to me what a man does for a living, you understand? But your business is a little dangerous.
And then this is a key moment in the scene, is Sollozzo says,
if you're worried about security for your million, the Tatalias will guarantee it.
And Sonny leans in and speaks when he never should and says,
Oh, are you telling me that the Tatalias guarantee our investment?
Vito's look and gesture. Because Sonny has violated the rules. And you can see Tom Hagen has the reaction.
Yep.
Of like, oh no.
And in that moment is the genesis of the idea of assassinating Vito.
Yep.
Because Sollozzo now sees that Sonny is down for it. So Sollozzo, with the backing of Tattaglia and, of course, we find out later, Barzini, is trying to kill the Godfather so that Sonny takes over the family and they make a deal with Sonny and everybody benefits financially from the situation. So in that, just that one moment, because Sonny, once again, a dick trying to penetrate everything, a dick trying to bust through everything, almost kills his dad.
Yep. Well, and what's interesting about this movie is there are a few geniuses. Vito Corleone, obviously.
Yes.
Michael, obviously. Sollozzo and Barzini, also.
A little bit.
They are definitely people.
Barzini, certainly.
Yeah.
But Tattaglia's a pimp.
Tattaglia's a pimp. And I love the way Vito settles it down.
I have a sentimental weakness for my children, and I spoil them, as you can see. They talk when they should listen. But anyway, Senor Sollozzo, my no is final, and I wish to congratulate you on your new business. I know you do very well, and good luck to you, especially since your interests don't conflict with mine.
Very respectful.
He's so classy.
Yes, he is.
So something we should say is that Coppola was about to be fired throughout this whole film.
Wow.
And that the studio hated much of what they saw. And in particular, they hated this scene.
Wow.
They thought Brando was mumbling. They couldn't understand him. This was shot on a Tuesday. So the studio saw the dailies on Wednesday. And he heard from them that they were very unhappy. And he also felt that he had spies, which he called traitors on the set, which is probably true, that there are people reporting back to Bob Evans and the heads of Paramount to make sure that this young director isn't messing anything up.
Yeah.
And so here's what, and this is why Coppola's smart. He went, they're never going to fire me in the middle of the week. You always fire a director over the weekend because you need time to replace them.
Right.
You fire them in the middle of the week, then someone's got to come in the next morning. That's not, you're not going to be ready. And so he said, I need to solidify my position by Friday. First, he fires 4 people, the 4 people that he thinks are traitors.
Wow.
He reshoots this scene with Brando and Sollozzo. Yeah. And what you're actually seeing is the second time they shot it.
Oh, wow.
And then he sends it to Paramount. And by this point, Paramount is like, okay, it's all right.
Yeah.
And he manages to stay on the shoot for another week.
So he pulled a Colonel Kurtz. He killed the double agents. He killed the double agents, and the enemy action dropped by 50% in the region.
Santino, what's the matter with you? I think your brain is going soft from all that comedy you're playing with that young girl.
Never tell anyone outside the family what you're thinking again.
So great.
Ugh. And of course, Michael echoes that later when he talks to Fredo in the Mo Green situation, right? And even more chilling. See, Vito does it from a place as a father to a son. Michael removes the relationship and is very chilling when he says it to Fredo.
It's terrifying when that happens later in the movie.
Yes, it is.
Tell Luca Brasi to come in.
I love that Luca Brasi just sits in the frame.
Yeah. It's so great.
He's such a presence.
Yeah.
And he says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go pretend that you're not happy here so you can find out what's going on with Sollozzo and the Tattaglias. And then Luca Brasi moves out of frame.
Yep. And by the way, the look on Luca Brasi's face, juxtapose that to the nervous guy at the wedding. This is a man about all business because now he's going to do a job.
He knows what to do.
He's very confident for the Godfather in that.
Yeah. And it's Christmas. And we are in front of a store, and there's Michael and Kay, and they're got some presents for everyone, and it's kind of romantic. And you actually almost see Al Pacino kind of smiley.
Yeah, a little bit.
Now, what do you want for Christmas?
Me? Oh, just you.
This is the very first shot they shot in the whole film.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And between that, we intercut with that, with Luca getting ready. He puts on a bulletproof vest. And we also have the Vito getting ready to go. He tells Fredo to tell Paulie to get the car. And we find out Paulie called in sick.
The son of a bitch. Yeah.
Yeah. And Fredo's like, oh, he's a good guy. Fredo's very trusting.
Yeah. Fredo's a terrible Don, man. Anyway,
yeah. Oh my! Can you imagine Don Fredo?
The family would be sunk within a month.
And then we see Luca walking somewhere, and the tension is sort of building. And he goes into this bar, which was shot in a Art Deco hotel in New York. And he walks past. I love that he walks past as a piece of glass, and etched into the glass is a fish, because Luca Brasi is going to end up sleeping with the fishes.
Yep.
And he sits down at this bar, and there's the bartender, who's Bruno Tattaglia. And I love the way Luca speaks. He says, he's a gift of scotch. It's pre-war. And Luca says,
ain't no big.
I love it. Ain't no big. And there's Salazzo.
You know who I am?
He says, I need someone strong like you. I heard you're not happy with the Corleone family. Want to join me? $50,000 to start. And he puts his hand out, but he doesn't take his hand.
That's Luca's an idiot for not taking the hand. That's the moment when Luca's dead. That's when
you
they
think
know.
they wouldn't? I think they were going to kill him anyway.
Oh, I think they were suspect, and I think this is a meeting where they're gauging whether he's actually really unhappy with Corleone and wants to jump to Italian family. It isn't until he doesn't take the hand. That's the sign to them that, nope, this fucker isn't actually fully committed, because Luca is so committed to Corleone that for him to take the hand of someone else would be such a violation to his ethics. So in that moment, I think they know he's not with them. And so they have what they had talked about, in case we don't think he's right, then we kill him right here.
It's so, and this is what's so great about great movies is I think they, in my mind, they always intended on killing him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But your interpretation makes perfect sense. That totally could be what goes on, because there is a very specific look from Bruno, which is sort of the, are we doing this look?
Yep.
And he pulls out, Luca pulls out a cigarette, Bruno goes to light it. And then there's this moment where he puts his hand down and they pat his hand.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, something weird's about to happen. And then Salazzo stabs that hand to the bar. Something that Coppola said, which I thought was really interesting, is he said, every murder needs a detail for you to remember. It has to be unique in some way. And as we go through, and there are obviously going to be a lot of murders, they all have a thing that makes them memorable, some of them more than one. And that stabbing hand and then the guy coming up behind with the garrote, that is memorable.
Yeah.
And it's very much what, like the descriptions in the book, that his face, his eyes bulge out, his face turns black.
I remember that.
And one thing that's interesting, to get his face to black, to change color, they have this makeup that changes color when it gets wet. So they put this stuff on and it's basically invisible. And then they had someone spraying a mist of water in his face that made his face get slowly darker as he's being choked.
Wow.
And he fights and he goes down past Bruno, and we see that knife still stuck in his hand, still stuck in the bar. And we see that we move back past that glass with the fish on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is the first real, oh shit.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, you got to have conflict, right? You once you set up the fact that it's Corleone and he's got this power and this menace or whatever, that now you've got to set up the danger, the conflict. What's going to keep you cheering for Vito, cheering for the Corleones? You have to set up, an equally dangerous antagonist that can go in many different directions. And so once they've set everything up and shown you what they can do, now let's get into setting up the antagonist to this family.
You know what's interesting that I didn't think of until you said it is that there's all sorts of small conflicts and character development. But until this moment, until the death of Luca, there's not a big conflict.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's all like, what's going to happen with Michael, and is Johnny Fontaine going to get the part, and who's this, and Sonny spoke up when he shouldn't have, and there's all these little things. They're all great and really interesting, but this is the moment where like the movie as a plot, as a story, really starts to drive forward.
Yeah.
Where actually back at the exact same store where we shot Michael and Kay shopping, and it's on the same day. This is the first day of the shoot, and out comes Tom, and he's got a sled. And the first thing I thought, look at that sled, is like, that looks like Rosebud.
It might have been a reference.
And there's Sollozzo, and he says, Tom, let's talk. And Tom's just like, well, I don't have time.
Make time, consigliere. Get in the car. What are you worried about? If I wanted to kill you, you'd be dead already.
And suddenly Tom looks around, and there's those guys. Can you imagine that moment where someone says, get in a car, and you go, I don't get in it. And then you see the dudes.
You know what's ironic? It's the same moment that Tom is a part of later with Tessio.
Oh, that's exactly right. It is exactly that moment.
Yeah.
Except worse, because he knows Tessio's going to die.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Whereas he didn't die.
Well, Tom thinks he's going to die, that's for sure. Yeah.
We're back at Genco Olive Oil, and they're heading home, and Vito says, I want to buy some fruit. One of the things, so this is what Coppola wrote in his notebook, is that he was thinking about Hitchcock. And that Hitchcock was very important. You show all the details, that you see everything happening. It has to be super, super clear, which this is. And we see him, go to the fruit guy, and it's interesting that he doesn't actually grab the fruit, but he points to what he wants. And we all know, of course, he's not paying for this fruit.
Right. And he knows he's going to get the best.
Mm-hmm.
He knows he's going to get the best fruit of whatever he picks out of that he wants. Yeah.
And we see, we're just on the street, and there's fire in a garbage can, and we hear footsteps, and there are these two guys coming around the corner. He spots them, and he knows.
Yep. He knows immediately.
And I think if he's 10 years younger, he gets away.
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
He almost makes it. He gets shot from behind, knocks that fruit over, and we're in a high angle, and the orange fruit against the dark street that spreads out from the high angle shot is so memorable. And again, it's the detail.
Yeah.
You cannot not remember what happens in this moment.
Also, Fredo. He yells for Fredo. Fredo! And Fredo jumps out of the car, fumbles the fucking gun, and his father is shot right there against the fender or front bumper of the car.
Multiple shots in the back. And I think if you're watching this movie for the first time, that guy's dead.
Yes.
And
Six shots.
And here's the other reason that he was thinking of Hitchcock is Psycho. Get introduced to a main character, kill the main character off at the end of Act 1. Now, Vito doesn't actually die, but he's gone essentially from the movie. So our main character is suddenly disappeared. Like, where's this movie going to go now?
Right.
Here's the other thing about this scene. So he and Gordon Willis made some rules, which I think is a really smart thing to do in terms of how you're going to approach a film. And their rule was they'd shoot it like a 40s film. Is that there's not going to be a zoom lens. There's not going to be a helicopter shot. It's all going to be camera basically at eye level, very traditional, very simple. And so they get to this scene and he says, I want a high angle. I want top down. And Gordon Willis says, no, that totally violates our rules. We cannot have a top down shot unless there's somebody up there looking down that we're from their point of view. Whose point of view is this? And Coppola says, it's my point of view. It's Orson Welles' point of view. I want to see the oranges.
That's true, because Orson uses the crane in Touch of Evil in that opening sequence. So, yeah.
Well, and it's like, I stand by my first statement. It's really good when you're making a movie to come up with rules. This color represents this. This is how we shoot this. This is our lensing. This is how we move the camera. And it's also really important to break the rules when you could get a great shot, which this is. And man, Fredo sitting down with that gun dangling from his finger, weeping uncontrollably, not even able to help his father or go to his father.
He reverts back to being a child who's lost something. And he even, instead of call the cops or call the police or call the ambulance or whatever, instead he just sits there and cries, and he even screams, Baba, as if he's a child trying to wake his father up from sleep. He cannot accept that his father might have just been killed in front of his eyes. So his reaction is just to yell Papa so loudly at him to try to wake him up from what he thinks is his death. It's so telling of who this character is,
Well, and this is what makes this a great film. Yeah. There's no wasted moments. There's no unnecessary shots. There's no characters that are weak. There's no performances that are weak. Like, every single detail is worth spending time on. And people have often commented on the Cine-Files, man, you guys actually will spend more time talking about a movie than the actual movie itself. Well, we are 45 minutes into The Godfather, and we've spent 2 hours to get there.
That's right.
And so there have been only 2 previous 3-part episodes in the history of the Cine-Files. The first was for Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes.
The second was for our incredible conversation about Black Panther. Guess what, folks? This is probably going to be our third. And I think right now, with Vito Corleone near death, with Tom just grabbed off the street, Luca Brasi dead, the entire Corleone family in disarray, I think it is time to end part 1 of our exploration of Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Facebook. Do a search for the Cine-Files. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, on YouTube, on Spotify, and you can now subscribe to the Cine-Files through Audible and through Amazon. So if those are services you use, and one of the cool things on Audible, by the way, because I know you like giving us reviews, not only can you review the Cine-Files, you can review every single episode individually on Audible, and I think you should take the time to do that. And if you don't have the time to do that, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Review the Cine-Files on iTunes. It deserves 5 stars, and we would like to have you do that. You could support the show on patreon.com/the Cine-Files, where you can request a film for us to do, like Matt Correa did for The Godfather. You can go to cinephiles.net and buy or stream The Godfather and every other film we've ever done through Amazon Prime. If you want to reach me, you can do so at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how about you?
You can always reach me at The Roca Says on Twitter and on Instagram. And if you want to go and watch some more of the stuff that I'm involved in, please go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Roca Says. Come and subscribe and see all the stuff we're doing there as well.
John, I have been enjoying this conversation so much, and I cannot wait to come back for part 2 of The Godfather next week on The Cine-Files.